Fighting for freedom, liberty, and the restoration of the Constitution. The Patrick Riggins Show. Call in now at 865-243-8255. That's 243-TALK. And now your host, Patrick Riggins.
Welcome back to the Patrick Riggins Show. Here, irritating both sides, the conservatives and the liberals. If you're a conservative or even a moderate Republican, or maybe even just a Republican with no modifier, and more importantly a conservative, you really need to listen to this segment. What I'm going to talk about is how major conservative voices define freedom in this country, what they think freedom actually is. Now, I talk about this subject frequently because, as you hear at the beginning of this show, here we are fighting for freedom, liberty, and the restoration of the Constitution. But notice the order of those words: freedom, then liberty, which are really one and the same, and then the Constitution. The individual's freedom and liberty comes first. In this country, they're supposed to be secured by the Constitution, which states, well, I'm paraphrasing, the individual retains all the freedom. The states are granted some permissions to do things, and then the federal government is granted even fewer permissions. Now, why this is so threatening to people, I'll never understand. But scared of it, they are. Even conservatives, people who espouse that they stand for freedom and liberty. Of course, what they really mean is freedom and liberty as long as you're living the way they think you should. Now, same story for liberals. As long as you're living according to the way they think you should, you're okay. But I always take more offense at conservatives, though, because they are the ones always preaching freedom, yet they don't embrace it. I've mentioned this many times, but at least the liberals let you know they are wanting to take away your freedom. The conservatives lie about it, and right to your face to boot. But getting on with my point on this segment, I know we, and by we I mean libertarians, I know we are starting to worry the conservatives, because this week, and I don't normally do this, but I'll mention another radio show host, even this week Rush Limbaugh addressed the issue and made known his stance on the matter. Now, being a free show, I don't want to sit here and tell you Rush said this and Rush said that, because there are some in this audience who would not believe it. They'd say, oh, Rush wouldn't have stated that, Patrick's just exaggerating. So, in the spirit of fairness, we broke down what he is saying so you can hear it for yourself. And he's the self-proclaimed spokesman of conservatives in this country. These people are really starting to feel the heat of the libertarians fighting to roll back all this government intervention, and with it, government control and direction of supposedly free American citizens. These conservatives don't like libertarianism any more than the liberals do, because it removes government from people's lives. As I've said numerous times on this show, both sides want to maintain governmental control of the people of this country. They both want to tell you how you should be living and with whom you should be living. They want to tell you what you can and can't do with your private property. They want to control as much of your life as possible, all because they know how you should live better than you do. Or that's their thinking on the matter anyway. The whole marriage issue has become prominent in this country since the Supreme Court started considering the legality of the Defense of Marriage Act, which, incidentally, I talked about on this very show just last week. If you want to hear some irrefutable and logical analysis on that subject, feel free after this show to head over to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Patrick Riggins Show, and there you can get that show and all the other archives in which you'll hear really why this show is the pinnacle of the Libertarian Lighthouse Radio Network. But getting back to the subject of freedom, Rush Limbaugh used the gay marriage subject to address freedom as he sees it from a conservative standpoint. Now, here is his take on it, and this is from his show this week.
Freedom is being misapplied or maybe incorrectly defined. Freedom does not mean hedonism. Freedom does not mean the sybaritic pursuit. Just do what you want.
Okay, so freedom doesn't mean do what you want. Then what does freedom mean? Well, it means doing what he thinks you should be doing. living how he thinks you should be living, thinking how he thinks you should be thinking. What he and other conservatives in this country are trying to do is define libertarian freedom as some amoral, going to hell in a handbasket, scary Sodom and Gomorrah society. If you believe in freedom to do what you want, then God is going to condemn this country and all of its inhabitants to Hades for eternity. Now, in this next clip, Rush points out that a broad definition of freedom is wrong and goes on to correctly link it to libertarians, but incorrectly to, as he puts it, quote, radical leftists.
Freedom is taking on a whole new meaning, incorrectly and dangerously so. But this very broad definition of freedom that is used to, for example, justify gay marriage is being advanced not just by radical leftists, but by libertarians as well.
So, radical leftists and libertarians are on the same page when it comes to freedom. Now, reasonable and intelligent people know how crazy this statement is. But the reason he is trying to link these two groups together, libertarians and radical leftists, is because he wants his audience immediately to discount anything a libertarian has to say. Because it's nothing more than exactly what a radical leftist would say. And his audience hates radical leftists. These conservatives are scared to death of any type of libertarian thinking taking place in the Republican Party or within the conservative movement. The way they see it, they want to be in charge. That's all. Kick out the liberals and put conservatives in charge. They want the same government intervention. They just want to be in charge of it. That's really the only difference. Now, in this next clip, Rush actually mentions Ron Paul in an effort to lend some credence to what he's saying.
Ron Paul said something, and I've mentioned this before, his so-called farewell address to Congress when he left. He said he couldn't believe how difficult it was, or is, to sell freedom to people.
Yes, Mr. Limbaugh, why is it so difficult to sell freedom to you and all the other conservatives in this country? You would think the conservative movement would be the first ones to jump onto the bandwagon, but they aren't. Let's hear what Dr. Paul has to say on this subject of gay marriage, and I've played this numerous times. I think we played it last week.
I think the government should just be out of it. I think it should be done by the church or private contract, and we shouldn't have this argument. Who's married and who isn't married? I have my standards, but I shouldn't have to impose my standards on others. Others have standards, and they have no right to impose their marriage standards on me. And I just don't like it. But if we want to have something to say about marriage, it should be at the state level and not at the federal government. Just get the government out of it. It's one area where it's totally unnecessary, and they've caused more trouble than necessary.
Well, apparently Mr. Limbaugh did not bother to listen to Dr. Paul make that statement, because Rush would profoundly disagree with it. I know that because of the statements we have just been playing for you. Here's more from Rush.
Now, he meant freedom from government, self-reliance, responsibility, taking control of your own life and making the most of it.
Well, he gets that correct. Dr. Paul means freedom from government. That's what he constantly talked about and still does. So is Mr. Limbaugh so confused about freedom that he doesn't realize he is just arguing against what Dr. Paul preaches? That he was just lumping together libertarians, of whom Dr. Paul is one of the biggest, with far-left radicals. Are all conservatives this confused? I don't think so. Personally, I think conservatives, well, they're just, and I apologize for saying this, but they're just not thinking. They have not sat down and completely thought out the positions for which they stand. If they did, they would realize that most of them are really libertarians. If they really thought about how the ways in which they want government telling people what to do, they would realize the hypocrisy of their positions. Now, in this next clip, Rush makes clear how he feels about this individual freedom.
Freedom without virtue isn't freedom. It will eventually destroy a society. Freedom without morality. Freedom without proper constraints and restraints. Freedom without an accompanying sense of responsibility. freedom without a spine or a spinal cord morality. We're not talking freedom.
Freedom without proper constraints and restraints is not freedom. Well, who says what those constraints and restraints are? This is what I mean when I say these people have not completely thought through these issues. They are doing exactly what they accuse liberals of doing. Acting without thinking, taking stands on issues without question. Unfortunately, I can't say the same for Mr. Limbaugh. He has thought out his positions, and he has decided that we all need to live the way he thinks we should.
To young people today, that's exactly what freedom is. Freedom is hedonism. Freedom is your sybarity pursuits. You do whatever you want, and as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else, there's nothing wrong with it. And it's the as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else, that's where the trouble begins.
It's the as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else, that's where the trouble begins. So if I'm living my own life, if I'm not infringing on someone else's natural human rights all of us are born with as humans, as long as I'm not infringing on someone else's natural human rights and they aren't infringing on mine, that's not enough. That's not good enough for these people who want to control how other people live. To live in that fashion, taking care of myself in a way that is acceptable to me, as long as it doesn't bother anyone else, that's not acceptable to these people. If you are a conservative in this radio audience, are you comfortable living that way? Do you agree with what this leader of your movement is stating? We are up on the bottom of the hour break here at the Patrick Regan Show already. When we come back, we'll have more of this with Rush. We'll also have some clips from Coulter, who ventures down the exact same road. And we'll get an update on Magpul out there in Colorado, all crammed into the last half of this show when we come back.